Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Nun Zayin. We're going to get started from the story that we started on Daf Nun Vav at the bottom. Hahu uvada dahavi ben Harda. There was a case in Harda. Didashu Yisrael v'vei kochavim lahu chamra. So we had a Jew and an idol worshiper treading on grapes. V'shai Shmuel tal tarigle, and Shmuel pushed off, making a decision for 3 of the holidays. My time. What was the reason? If you're going to say Mishum de Kasaval, the Imishkach Natana Das, or Rabbi Natan, maybe he was looking for someone who was going to forbid it like Rabbi Natan holds. Osline afilu b'hana'ah, and then he would be able to forbid it even to benefit from. Now, we don't know yet who Rabbi Natan is. We're going to see that right now. Tanya, it says in a Braita, midado bein biyah bein beregel yimachel. If you measure, if you put your hand in, the idol worshiper puts his hand in or her hand in, whether they're doing their hand or whether their foot, to measure the level of the wine, yimachel, it can be sold. Okay, meaning you can't drink it because they put their hand in, but you also it's not going to be forbidden b'hana'ah because we assume, what's the assumption here? We assume that the person had intent to be focusing on specifically measuring. And therefore, while you're doing a job, you're not really thinking of doing other things. Likewise, when you're treading on the grapes, you're not really thinking about offering it up as a libation, you're focusing on your job. So if you're measuring according to Tanakama, you can sell it. It's not going to be forbidden to benefit. We're still going to avoid drinking it, but we're going to be lenient when it comes to selling. Basically meaning it's not forbidden to benefit from. However, Rabbi Natan Omer, biyad asur beregel mutar. If you do it with your hand, it's actually forbidden. We're going to be strict. But with your leg, it's not, or your feet, it's not a problem. So now we're going to say, well, if you say, let's go back, that Shmuel maybe was going to be strict like Rabbi Natan's position, but let's think about our case. What was happening with the grapes? He was using his feet, not his hands. So Imad Amar Rabbi Natan biyad, Beregel mi'amar, what Rabbi Natan said was with using a hand. He wasn't saying it using your feet. So it can't be that that's what Shmuel was waiting for, someone to be strict like that and forbid it to benefit like Rabbi Natan, because even Rabbi Natan wouldn't forbid this kind of case. Ella, must be he was looking for the reverse. If I could find someone who permits like Rabbi Shimon, then I could even permit this wine to be drunk. Okay, what's Rabbi Shimon? Well, we're going to get to it in a few dapim. On Daf Samach Amud Bet, the Mishnah says, if you check in the middle of the Mishnah, talks about, for example, midado b'kaneh. If the Gentile idol worshiper measures the wine with a reed, okay, or some other cases. So Rabbi Shimon permits even to drink. So maybe that's what Shmuel was waiting for. And apparently that's what he was waiting for. And then he wanted to permit it even to drink based on Rabbi Shimon's position, which we'll learn when we get to Samach Hamabet. So we'll leave it for right now. But that seems to be what Shmuel was hoping for. Sounds like didn't work. He didn't find someone who permitted because the Tanakhama there disagrees and only allows it to be sold, not to be drunk. But that seems to be what he was looking for. Now we're going to have another case. There was a case to have a Biram in the city of Biram. He went up a palm tree and took down a lulav, a palm branch. Now, as the person was, the idol worshiper was coming down the tree with the palm branch in hand, Naga bereshe de lulave bechamra shelo b'chavana. He touched with the lulav branch the wine without any intent. In other words, he was coming down with a vat of wine, apparently at the bottom. And as he was coming down, the lulav went by accident, or without any intention, into the lulav branch went into the wine. Shar Rav the Zabune Lov de Kochavim. So Rav permitted this to be sold to idol worshippers, meaning you can't drink it, but you can benefit, you can sell it. Amru, Rav Kahana Rav Asi the Rav. So Rav Kahana Rav Asi came to Rav and said, V'ha Marhu Amra, but Rav, you yourself said, Tinok ben Yomo, hu oseh yenesech. Even a child, 1 day old, can create a situation of yenesech. Now let's compare the cases. Right? Now we have a child who's just born, who clearly has no intent whatsoever. And we have this person coming down from the tree who also had no intent. Before, so basically, they're saying, Rav, how could you permit when you yourself forbade the wine of the child? So Amar Lahu, Rav says to them, Imar Damre Ana B'Shtia, B'Hanami Amre. This is the same language, by the way, as before, where Rabbi Natan said, right, Imar Damre Rabbi Natan B'Yad Regel Mi'amar. This time Rav says about himself. What I said was with drinking. When I said a tinok ben yomo makes it yenesach for drinking purposes, not for benefiting, well, I'm not going to be that strict with a child. Okay, not even especially a newborn baby. So Rav basically says, I'm going to distinguish between those two cases because really they're one and the same. But in both cases, I say the same thing, which is no drinking, yes, benefit. Now, I want to compare this to the previous case of Shmuel because both are kind of similar and yet they're somewhat different. Now, the ruling seems to be the same, permitted to benefit from, but forbidden to drink. Now, in both cases, there's a reason why we think that you didn't have intent to offer it as a libation, and that's why we're going to be more lenient, although we're not going to be completely lenient. Now, what's the reason? So in each case, it's a little bit different. In the cases we just learned with the child and the person coming down the tree, there was no intent at all. There was no intent even for an action. There was no intent for anything. There was no intent to touch the wine. So that's one situation, which you could say maybe that's the most lenient, right? There was no intent at all. Alternatively, you could say maybe the other case is more lenient because there, what's the issue? There was intent to do an action. It's just that the action you intended was some other action. In other words, you intended to touch the wine. So that you have intent. But the intention to touch the wine was to measure it or to tread on it, to make wine. You clearly, now sometimes, right? This is an interesting way to think about it. Lack of intention, I had no intention at all. Maybe then you could fill that in. There's like a void there. There's emptiness. You could sort of fill in maybe with, oh, well, in the end you touched the wine. Maybe we could say that it was for a libation. Or maybe you could say there was no intent at all, and maybe it's even more lenient. So again, it could go both ways. But intention to do the action, on the one hand, you did intend to put your hands in the wine. On the other hand, you were very focused on one thing, which means you didn't have room to be focused at all on doing a libation because you were in the middle of your job, whatever it might be. So it's an interesting way to think about it. In any case, the halacha is the same for both, but I wanted to just think about those concepts. So now we're going to start a gufa. We're going to go into Rav, and we're going to have like a kind of circular sugya because we're going to see we're going to end where we start, but we'll see where we go. Okay, and then you'll understand as we go through. I'm a Rav. Tinok ben yomo oseyenes. So we're going to start with Rav. Rav, the statement that we quoted before, a child just 1 day old can create a problem of yeneseth. Eitive Rav Shimi bar Chia l'Rav. Now, Rav Shimi bar Chia comes to Rav with a problem with this Breita. Now, this Breita we're going to read a few different ways. So that's why we're going to, in the end, come full circle and you'll see, but we're going to read this Breita in a few different ways. Halokech avadim min havdei kochavim shemalu v'lo tavlu. We have Gentile slaves. In this case, we bought them. Okay, somebody buys them. And they were circumcised, but they didn't do the tefillah in the mikveh. Now, generally, when you have an Eved Knani, they become part of your household. They keep mitzvot, and the reason why they do that, they go through this process. They also get circumcised, and they also go in the mikveh. In this case, we have a situation where a Jew purchases an idol worshiper slave and gives him a circumcision, but he doesn't go to the mikveh. So he's not really Jewish. He's still, no, they're never really Jewish, but they're pseudo. They're kind of this in-between stage. But in this case, they didn't do the tefillah, so they didn't finish the process. And a similar case, and notice the word v'chein, and also, we're going to get back to this word also, the sons of maidservants that are also Canaanite maidservants who went through a brit milah but didn't go to the mikveh. So what's their status? Well, Ovdei Kochavim in general, okay, the rabbis made a gzera, the rabbinic ordinance, that they're going to be treated like they're impure. They carry impurity with them, like a person who's a zav. So some of the ramifications are rokan umidrasam bashuk tameh. If anything they spit on, their saliva goes on, or they step on in the shuk, is impure. So the same is true for this person, because this person was a slave who went through part of the process, but didn't finish the process. So for purposes of impurity, it's the gzera of the rabbis is applicable to them as well. The amrei la tahor, but some actually say that they're actually pure. Why are they pure? Well, because the whole thing anyway, to say that Gentiles are impure is Gzera de Rabbanan. It's just a decree. Now, decrees are not made generally in very uncommon circumstances. This, you would say, is a very uncommon circumstance. Either they didn't undergo any process, and then they're not really Evet Knani, or they underwent the complete process. Having someone in this in between is very uncommon, so the rabbis didn't see a reason to make a Gzera in this case, and that's why you would say it's tahor. They're tahor, okay? They don't carry impurity. So we have two opinions about this, but I want to get it clear. We're talking about either purchasing a slave or a slave who's born to a maidservant, okay, who's working for a Jew, right, who also went through this semi-conversion process. But the shipcha went through. She did, well, she didn't do brit milah. She's a woman, but she did the tefillah. But her child, right, she's not a full Jew, her child would need to also do the same thing, and the child only did a circumcision, but not the mikvah. So now they say, and in addition, what's their status is comes to wine. Now, that's really what we're interested in. Yenam gdolim osim nesech, ktanim ein osim nesech. Now, even though they're treated as idol worshippers still, only the older ones among them create a problem of nesech. They touch our wine. Tanim, the young ones, ein osim nesech. Now, Elohim Gedolim Elohim Katanim, what makes someone Gadol or Katan for these purposes? Gedolim Yodim B'tiv Avodah Zarah M'Shamsheha. So Gedolim means they understand the idea of Avodah Zarah and things that serve Avodah Zarah, to worship it. Katanim Einam Yodim B'tiv Avodah Zarah M'Shamsheha. But the young ones don't have any understanding. So they can't make anything Yenesa because they can't offer libations. They don't even understand from it. So, Katanimiyah, what does it say here? What's the main point? Problem against Rav. Let's remember where we started. Rav said a child who's just a day old can make the wine Yenesech. But here it says very clearly the young, is also someone who's considered an idol worshiper, can't make the wine Yenesech. Right? Katanimiyad. It says, however, that Gedolim in Ktanim lo. Minors can't. So, how would Rav explain this? Tirgama abinei shvachot. They explained it that it's referring specifically to the daughters, the sons of the shvachot. Okay, the sons of the maidservants. Now, when it says that the ketanim, the whole second part, now we thought, again, let's go back to the structure. We have two cases, two different kinds of people, a servant, a slave, sorry, who's bought, and a slave who's born in a Jewish household already. And then we had two halachot, which are tuma, either they are tamei or they're not tamei. We didn't know which one. And the second one, which is the older ones do create nesach, the younger ones don't. We assume both are talking about both. Because it also said, b'chein b'nei shvachot, right? And likewise, meaning the law is the same for both. So we're now going to say that that second halacha about the minors is only the sons of the shvachot. Now, why would they be different? Because they were born into a Jewish household. So we're not really worried they're going to make a yenesach. Number one, they were already circumcised. Number two, they were born in a Jewish household. So it's unlikely they're doing yenesach, whereas the ones who we purchased from the outside, we have to be concerned even if they're minors. And that would fit with Rav, who was talking about a katan, who's just a regular oved kochavim, idol worshiper, and we'd have to be worried. What's the problem? The problem is how to read this braita. Havachin kamar, but it said, and the same is true for the b'nei shvachot, meaning it's all the same. So we're going to have two ways to explain this. One is to say the v'chein is really referring to just the first halacha of the rokan umidrasan. And then it's saying, okay, let's start from the beginning. You buy a slave, or one is born into your household, and they're in this in-between, right? Malu v'lo tavlu. Their rok and their midras is tameh, okay? And not only the ones who you buy, but also the ones who are born into your household, okay? They're also going to be just as severe, right? It's just as strict. Well, hani chalaman damar tameh, that's only if you say that their rok and their midras is impure. But if you hold elaman damar tahor ma'ikalamemar, but if you say it's tahor, then this doesn't really make sense. You're going to say slaves that you purchase, and even the sons of shvachot, of the maidservants who were born in Jewish households, their rok and their midras is pure. Now, it would be the opposite, right? It would be the b'nei shvachot, b'chein, and also the slaves, because right, it's the wrong order. It doesn't make sense. So therefore, one way of saying it, if you have the version that it's tamei, then we can say the b'chein is only the first halacha of the rok and the midras, and the second halacha of the gedolim ktanim distinction is only for the sons of shvachot. That's option one. But if you go with the approach that it means tahor, then it doesn't make sense to say slaves And also the sons of these maidservants, their Rokan and Madras is pure, doesn't really work. So we're going to say that the V'chein is coming to teach us something else. Hakamash Malan, it's coming to teach us Avadim Duya de Bnei Shvachot, that slaves are like this, the sons of the maidservants. Okay, basically saying we have by a slave, and also the sons of Shvachot. The way we're going to explain also is that whatever is true for Bnei Shvachot is also going to be true for the Avadim. And we're going to say the following. Ma b'nei shvachot, just like b'nei shvachot, malu v'lo tavlu, huda osim nesech. Is it a problem that they touch the wine, it becomes nesech? Specifically when? Our case, malu v'lo tavlu. They're now going to do an inference. And what they're going to say is the whole word v'chein is coming, not for the first part, which immediately follows it, so it's a little bit weak, this explanation, and not even for the second part about the malu, about the yenesech, but specifically an inference from that last part. Okay, so we're moving the v'chein to be referring to an inference from the second part. So what's the inference? Well, maluva lo tavlu is when they make a nesach, but maluva tavlu lo, right? If they had a brit milah and they went to the mikvah, well then they don't make it yeh nesach. Now you might think this is obvious, but we'll see it's not so obvious. And what they want to say is just like, okay, you take the son of Shifcha. He's born in a Jewish household, and he goes through brit milah and he tovels. So obviously we're going to assume he's not going to be making yeh nesach anymore, right? But the chidush here, b'chein b'nei shvachot, what we're trying to say is b'nei shvachot, whatever's true for them is going to be true also for someone you buy on the slave market. So, av avadim kain, even slaves that you buy on the slave market, as soon as they go through a brit milah and they go to the mikvah, you don't have to worry anymore about yenesa. Now, la'afuke midirav Nachman Amar Shmuel, and this is to say, this bright is saying we don't agree now. Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel didn't exist yet, but what they're trying to say is we don't agree with anyone who might claim this, as someone did claim later, to say the Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel halokech avadim min avdei kochavim af al pi shemalu v'tavlu osim yenesech ad shetishaka avodah zarah mipiyah. This is a very interesting halacha. What this is saying is, if you purchase a Gentile Obed Kochavim, idol worshiper slave, from the shuk. And then the person undergoes this semi-conversion, right? They become partially Jewish. Again, they're chayiv in mitzvot. Okay, they're not chayiv in time-bound mitzvot. They're not obligated in time-bound because they have a master who's in charge of them. But they do have to do all the positive mitzvot. Even though they did this and they went through this kind of conversion process, they are still going to be suspect of Yeh Nesech until they stop talking about Avodah, which makes perfect sense. Just because you brought them in, you bought them off the slave market, they're now in your house, and they go through this process to be living in your household, it doesn't mean they don't still believe in their other gods. It takes time for that to switch. So according to Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, there is still a problem of Yeh Nesech for them. And according to Rav, the way they read this, according to Rav, this Braita is coming to say the v'chein, and this was all to explain the v'chein. If you can't explain it in the Rokan and the Midrash, which was a much better way to explain it, but if you say it's tahor, that really doesn't make sense. It's all coming to say that the halachot are the same for both, and just like the b'nei shvachot, once they do a brit milah and right, this is again an inference. If they did both, right, our Braita is talking about they only did one. But if they did both, and they wouldn't be suspect of Yeh Nesech anymore, that would hold true for a slave as well. To disagree with those who think that as soon as they come into your household and do Brit Milah and do all the, and Tovel, doesn't help. They still might worship their idols for at least a certain time period. We'll see in another minute what that time period is. So, Kamash Malan Dilo. So this Braita was coming to say, no, we don't agree with that. And that's the way we explain the Braita. This was all, and again, I want you to remember this because we're going to do this again in a different order. This was all. We have Rav's statement about the Tinok Ben Yomo, which creates a problem of Yeh Nesech. We have the Braita that said that a minor doesn't create a problem of Yeh Nesech. Why not, if they're still considered Gentile, because they only did half this process? And the answer is that line about the Katan is only talking about the Bnei Shvachot. It's not talking about the Eved. And then, why does it say the V'chein then? Well, the first explanation was it's only on the first part of the Braita, and the second part, it's actually different. Or we say, well, it's actually different, but there's something similar, which is if they did do both, the inference from that Braita, which is in the case where they did a Brit Milah and they went to the mikveh, then we're not going to worry anymore. Not gadol, not katan. Now, if you didn't get all this, we're going to review this in a bit of a different manner in the continuation. Goof. So now we're going to go in depth into this statement of Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. And then, since we just explained that the Breita is going against, right, to say this isn't true, we're going to eventually bring back the Breita as a difficulty of Rav Nachman, because obviously it doesn't fit with what he said. And then we're going to have to explain it, and then we're going to go into a totally different explanation of the Breita. And then, in the end, we're going to come full circle, because we're going to say, oh, well, that explanation of the Breita means that it disagrees with Rav, actually, because that one is going to explain the Breita as saying Tinok is not a problem at all. Okay, so that's why I said we're going to come full circle. So I'm Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. If you purchase a slave, okay, now we're just going to read the same exact Breita over again. So it's just good review. You purchase a slave from an Ovei Kochavim, from an idol worshiper, even though they went to the mikvah, even though they were circumcised but didn't go to the mikvah. Sorry, even though they went. Oh, sorry, I got confused. I thought we were in the Breita. My mistake. Let's go back for 1 second. I'm Rabbi Nachman Amar Shmuel, halokech avadim min avdei kochavim, if you purchase a slave, even though malu v'tavlu, even though they went through the entire process, usim yenesach, it's still a problem of yenesach, as tishakau v'adas Zarah mipiyam, until they completely forget Avodah Zarah from their mouths. Okay, this we read already before. V'kama, how long? Now we want to explain this. Well, I'm Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, ad 12 chodesh, 12 months. Okay, a whole year basically. After a year, you can assume there's no more yenesach problems, but for a year, you have to worry. Now here comes the Breita. Rav is going to say, but the Breita doesn't fit with what you said, which we know already because we just explained it that way. So if you purchase a slave from idol worshippers that went through a Brit Milah but didn't go to the mikvah, and also sons of maidservants that went through a circumcision but didn't go to the mikvah, rokan umidrasan, turning out on a bed, bashuk tameh. Okay, so the rok and the midras and the shuk is impure. Some people say it's actually pure. Yenam, their wine. So again, the older ones will create a yenesach problem because they're ovdei kochavim. The minor ones will not make a problem of yenesach. And eluhin gdolim ve'eluhin ktanim. What does that mean? Gadol katan. Gdolim yodim b'tiv avodah zarah m'shamsheh. Ktanim ein yodim b'tiv avodah zarah m'shamsheh. Right? These understand avodah zarah. Those don't. Katani miyad. In any case, what does it say here? Malu v'lo tavlu in. Malu v'tavlu lo, right? It's specifically, this case is because they went to the mikvah and they were circumcised, did go to the mikvah. But if they were circumcised and went to the mikvah, then we wouldn't say that that's the case. So it sounds like, again, if you understand it the way we did, that both halachot apply to both groups of people. Basically seems to be saying the gadol makes yenesech specifically because they haven't gone to the mikvah. Once they go to the mikvah, there's no yenesach problem, not for gadol either, and not for even someone who was purchased from the shuk, and that goes completely against Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. So tirgama abnei shvachot, what's he going to say? That inference that malu v'tavlu lo is only bnei shvachot. Once the bnei shvachot go to the mikvah and also circumcise and go to the mikvah, then we don't have to worry anymore that they're going to do yenesach because they were born in a Jewish household. But if you purchase one of them from the shuk, you have to worry, just like Rav Nachman said. And that's how he's going to read this Breita, that the second part and the inference from the second part is different for the Bnei Shvachot and the slaves, as opposed to before, which we said they're specifically the same. So the Gemara is going to ask, katani, but it says v'chein, meaning they're the same. How are you going to explain that? To which they answer, same answer as we gave before. Maybe the v'chein is only referring to the first part of the Breita. Rokan umidrasan, it's referring to the rok and the midras, and that's it. But again, that only works if you say the rok and midras is tamei, and then you say, oh, even the bnei shvachot also are impure. But if you hold it's tahor, it doesn't make any sense to say if you purchase slave, and even if, right, and also if they're born into a Jewish household. Of course, also if they're born into a Jewish household, they're going to be their rok and their midras is pure. If the ones you purchase from the shuk are pure. So, hakamash malan, avadim dumia de bnei shvachot. So again, they're going to say, but this is going to have to be different, that what it really means v'chein is that avadim, slaves you buy from the shuk, are the same as bnei shvachot in a particular way. In what way are they the same? Ma bnei shvachot. Now here it's going to be about the second part as well, but not about the inference, but about what it actually says in the second part. not what we can infer from it, which is what we did last time. Just like the b'nei shpachot, we're going to be lenient with their minors, right? Their minors don't create a yenesach problem, even though they haven't gone to the mikveh yet. But just like only the older ones we're concerned about, but not the younger ones, also slaves, if they haven't toveled in the mikveh, still only the older ones among them are going to have a yenesach issue. We're going to have a yenesach issue with them. They touch our wine, but not the minors. And then they're going to say, this is where I said we're coming full circle. According to this explanation, it's lafuke mirav. It's going to disagree with what Rav said to Amarav, Tinok ben Yomo, Seyenesech, Kamash Malan Dilo. Because Rav said a minor, right, even a newborn baby can create a Yenesech problem. And this bright is telling you no. And that was the chiddush of the word v'chein. That what's true for the b'nei shpachot, which is their minors don't create a Yenesech problem, is also true for the older ones. And it's also true for the ones who were who were bought from the shuk, and meaning they were originally idol worshippers, but they're still minors. Their minors we're not going to be strict with at all. And that would be the same for any idol worshiper minor, which goes against what Rav says. So we came full circle. We started with Rav, and we raised a difficulty on Rav from the Breita. We had to reread the Breita to make it make sense. Then, according to that reading of the Breita, it raised a difficulty with what Shmuel said, what was quoted by Rav Nachman as Shmuel saying. Then, once we read the Breita that way and said, oh, it goes against Rav and Shmuel, what Rav Nachman, quoted Shmuel as saying, then we brought the Breita, Rabbah brought it as a difficulty on what Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel. We had to reinterpret the Breita, and then that interpretation actually disagrees with Rav. And with that, we finish that section. We're going to just get started on the next one and continue it in tomorrow's daf. There was a case of mechosa. Ata ove kochavim aya lechanuta Yisrael. And an idol worshiper comes into the store of a Jew. He says to the people in the store, you guys have something, you can sell me some wine. They said, no, we don't have wine to sell you. Now on the side, there was some wine in a pail. The idol worshiper walks over there, puts his hand in, mixes it around. Is this not wine? Now, the owner of the store got very angry. And because he was so angry, because he didn't want to sell it to the guy, and the guy was saying, oh, this is wine, and that wine, I guess, wasn't for sale, he takes it in his anger, and he throws it into his barrel, basically showing, this is not for sale. This belongs in my barrel. What's the problem? The idol worshiper, right, the guy was so angry, he didn't pay attention, but the idol worshiper put his hand in the wine, mixed it around, made it yenesach, and now it got dumped into the big vat with all this other wine. So what does he do with that whole wine? So Rava permitted it to be sold because what did he say? It's like we saw before. When you put your hand in for a particular purpose, which he was trying to feel it, was it wine or make a point? But he wasn't trying to offer it as a libation, so you can't drink it, but you can sell it. If Lugale Rav Huna bar Chinna, Rav Huna bar Rav Nachman, Rav Huna bar Rav Nachman disagree. Nafke Shipura de Rabba Basharu, and Nafke Shipura de Rav Huna bar Chinna, Rav Huna bar Nachman be'asre. You might remember this from Daf Mem, and it was actually the same characters, Rava and Rav Huna bar Chinna. They each pull out their shofarot, which was their way of making a big announcement, and Rava made a big statement, this is permitted. And Rav Huna bar Chinna and Rav Huna bar Rav Nachman, who was with him, made a big announcement that this is forbidden. Now, I want to remind you of the case there, and you can think about it, because what's interesting is if you look back there, it was on Daf Mem, and it was the issue of this boat that came with all these fish, and they didn't see scales on the fish, but they saw scales on the walls of the boat, and one of them said, which we're going to see right now, the one who forbade here actually permitted it there and said there it's permitted because there were scales. The scale on the side of the boat, it must have come from the fish. And Rava said, no way, no how. There were a lot of kosher fish in the area, and it could be the last time the boat was used, there were scales from other fish, and it's not necessarily these fish, and you can't permit the fish. So what's interesting is it's different. It's not like each one always has an agenda to be lenient or strict. But what's interesting is that they both seem to have these battles with each other, and they each pull out the shofarot, and I'm showing I'm right, and I'm showing I'm right, and there must have been some history there with the relationship between the two. Anyway, it's interesting. Always when you can make connections. Good. Okay, so quick summary because we already summarized the main part of the daf already, but we had a bunch of stories. The first one was these two people treading on the grapes together, idol worshiper and Jew. Shmuel waited a while because he was hoping to try to permit. First, we thought maybe he was trying to be more strict. It turns out he was trying to permit even to be drunk, but it ends up in this in between, which is again, you had intent for something, not for idol worship though. So we assume that you probably weren't offering us up a libation, but we're not going to let you drink it, but we will let you sell it. Same thing with the next case, which was where he was going up with the lulav and it accidentally touched on the way down. It touched into wine. And there was lack of intent, right? We talked about the difference. It's a little complete lack of intent. And then we said, oh, but why is that not like, right? Why did Rav say there it was okay? But then Rav with the child said it wasn't okay. And they said, no, with the child, they also said it was okay. It was just forbidden to drink. You just can't benefit. I'm sorry, you can benefit. You can benefit. That's what I was permitting. I was permitting benefit. I wasn't permitting drinking. And then we went into this circular thing where we have Rav and Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, and there are two statements in how they work in with that brighta that we saw. And then we finished with this other case in Mechoza, which was Rav's city. That was where he was the Rav. And we had this case where the Jew didn't want to sell the wine. Right? He claimed he didn't have any wine. The Gentiles saw the wine, put his hand in it and then messed it up. However, Rav said actually it could be sold to someone who wasn't Jewish, but Rav Huna bar Chinana and Rav Huna bar Rav Nachman didn't allow it. And we're going to continue that story tomorrow. From here, we'll finish and wishing everyone a good day.